Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. Andre here. Before we get started with today's video, I just wanted to take a quick minute to say thank you for everybody who showed up in the last 10 days and everyone who had shown up before that, quite frankly. I had absolutely no idea that the channel was gonna more than double in size after posting that 10-day Q&A video. So thank you everybody who watched it, shared it, liked it, and is now here because of it. One of the questions I got was how I feel about the idea that some of these true crime stories, whether it's a movie like 0 Day or a podcast or a book, can be perceived as glorification of the events in question. Whether that's school shooting or a cult or a serial killer, I'm in somewhat of a unique position to be able to comment on that, being sort of the face of at least one true crime property, obscure though it may be. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about whether or not the true crime genre in general celebrates and glorifies these types of actions and activities, and what to look for in a book or a movie or a podcast to kind of try to figure out what their agenda is. One of the very first things to look at in this subject is artist intent. I think it's important to understand what it is that the people creating the works that we're consuming are actually trying to convey and communicate. Whether that's a book or a movie or a podcast, it doesn't really matter. The people who are involved in creating those products are exhibiting some form of artistry. A film director will probably be the first person to say that they are creating a piece of art, but a journalist probably wouldn't say that it's art because that makes it sound subjective. But at the end of the day, they're taking video and audio and mixing them together, selecting the pieces that you get to see and hear in order to convey a certain message and narrative. We have to understand that there's an intent behind what's being communicated. So if you're trying to look at a piece of work to decide if it's a glorification or celebration of violence or some other horrific action, the first step, in my mind at least, is to stop and look at what it is the creator was trying to do. So to illustrate this, we're gonna take a look at two movies. The first one is the 2003 Patty Jenkins directed Charlize Theron starring vehicle, Monster. In this movie, Charlize Theron plays the first recognized female serial killer, Eileen Wuornos, I think that's how you pronounce it. We're introduced to her and are able to see the traumas and the difficulties that she experiences in her life, up to and including being sexually assaulted. This movie is never intending to convince you that you should go play with Eileen Wuornos action figures. They're not trying to celebrate her and say what a hero she was or excuse the things that she did. But they're trying to hold up a mirror to her experiences in her life and say, these are the things she went through. These are the things that led her to the end result that we know her for, being a serial killer. It's one thing to look at someone's life and understand where they came from and how they ended up where they went. It's quite another to look at that and say, hurrah, let's all be like that. In this case, the movie does a really good job. In fact, it won an Oscar for Charlize Theron, showing us the horrors that can lead somebody to doing something terrible, but at the same time not lionizing them or celebrating them as heroes. Now, we're gonna contrast this to another movie that involves murder perpetrated by a psychologically traumatized individual, and that is John Carpenter's 1978 jump scare classic, Halloween. Nobody in their right mind would call this a true crime movie or suggest that it's an accurate depiction of anything. No one would say that Mike Myers is in any way, shape, or form, a fleshed out character that you're meant to sympathize with or recognize as a hero. Quite the contrary. Mike Myers as a character doesn't really have a lot of background exposition, and you're not meant to identify with Mike Myers. Mike Myers is essentially just a proxy for a cartoon monster that inspires jump scares. The fact that it features a homicidal rampage is almost incidental. The whole point of the movie is just to scare teenagers on date night. I think it's Michael Myers actually. Mike Myers is Wayne, and Michael Myers is this stabby kill guy. Sorry, Mike. This is a hugely reductivist analysis of these movies. They are completely different genres, made by completely different creative teams at different eras in history. They have completely and very clearly different intents. But the reason that it's a useful comparison is because they contain similar story elements that are taken in very, very different directions. When your intent is to examine the reality of these situations, like they did in Monster, one of the things that you need to do is understand that the person whose life you're depicting, whether it's Eileen Wuornos or the fictionalized characters in Zero Day, is that they have to be people who exist in a realistic world in order to adequately convey the horror of what they're doing. So to bring it back to Zero Day, when we were making that movie, the intent was not to say these characters need to be likable so that the audience will condone their actions. They're not good dudes. You should not like them that way. Quite the contrary. The more you're able to identify with elements of these characters or find something in them that you like or find charming or interesting, the more horrific their actions will be when they finally take them at the end of the movie. And so if you want to effectively portray the horrors of this type of scenario, of a school shooting, which is an absolutely unfathomably awful thing to have happen, the way to accomplish that is by making the characters seem like they could exist in a world that we live in, because unfortunately they do. So this brings me to the second element that I would look for in one of these stories, and that is the portrayal of the characters and the world. When you think about how a character is portrayed in a movie, it's an actor and a director making a lot of different choices about the performance. Are those performances really, really big and like, Al Pacino in The Devil's Advocate? Or are they very, very sort of low and simmering, like pretty much anything Ben Foster has ever done? By extension to that, if you have big swooping Michael Bay style crane shots and these really huge epic rising musical scores from Hans Zimmer like in Gladiator, you're going to be conveying this idea that's different perhaps than a respectful or sensitive movie about a true crime would necessarily want to be. Again, going back to Monster, you don't see those big rippling scores. You don't see those big elaborate shots of slow motion people, running like you would in a Michael Bay Transformers movie, because that's not the intent. That's not how the world and the characters should be portrayed. And all of those things amount to the language of cinema. So if you're watching this movie about true crime or a school shooting or any other kind of horrific incident, and you feel yourself, getting jazzed up by the score like it was a Fast and Furious movie, that might be a sign that something is a little problematic. The Andre and Cal characters in Zero Day are not intended to be role models. They are not people that anyone should look up to by any means. So through their words and their actions, even though they seem likable at times, the point is not to make them something to aspire to, but rather to illustrate the horror of what they're doing later on in the movie. It's like I said before, by grounding them as realistic characters, by looking at Eileen Wuornos and understanding all of the traumas that she went through and making her a more fully fleshed out human being, we're more able to understand the reality of the world in which they exist and therefore connect that to the reality of our own world. If the characters in a movie like Zero Day, which deals with intensely sensitive subject matter, had been written to be very melodramatic, it would have been disrespectful to the subject matter and insensitive to the victims, frankly, because it would take it out of the realm of a realistic depiction and it would denigrate the events that took place. And to go back to a character like Michael Myers in Halloween, you get exactly that. You get this supernatural, cartoony villain that, seemingly has superpowers going around killing people. You don't take it seriously because it's not steeped in reality. It doesn't have an element that you can identify with, and it certainly isn't founded in any kind of rules of a world that we live in. So we automatically are able to suspend disbelief and say, okay, I'm going to buy into this as sort of a silly jump scare, but I don't expect to go out into the parking lot and see a dude with like a hockey mask. It's just not going to happen. Because the language of that movie separates us from the world that they're creating. But when you have a true crime story, when you have a story like Zero Day or like Monster, the intent is to depict those events in the world as being as accurate and true to life as possible, because the audience is meant to recognize the reality of the story. So ultimately, it's that overall combination of factors that decide whether the presentation itself is intended to be a glorifying, celebratory portrayal of the events or individuals involved, or if it's intended to, again, hold a magnifying glass up and say, this is what happened, So ultimately, bottom line, the too long didn't read, too long shouldn't have watched, whatever it happens to be, is no, I don't think that the vast majority of true crime movies, podcasts, stories in general, are glorification or celebration of the individuals who perpetrate those actions. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button. If you feel like you want to stick around and see what's next to come, hit the subscribe button. Over the next several weeks and months, you're going to start to see some changes. Background's going to change, location's going to change, and the content and sort of direction of the channel is going to be evolving and growing in different ways. I've settled on a trajectory that I want to go in that allows us to explore the world, explore different themes and subjects, whether it's science, history, politics, sociology, exploring the world in a lot of different ways, whether it's being out in the world or in studio, which is right now my living room. So anyway, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and as usual, you will see me in the next video.